Good Wednesday afternoon, everybody. I hope and pray that you have been blessed so far this Wednesday. It is time for another episode of After the Sermon. This past Sunday, I was preaching from Genesis chapter 12, mostly a little bit at the end of chapter 11, but we went into uh, chapter 12 and covered really verses 1 through 9 and started the narrative of Abram. And of course, later on, he'll become known as Abraham, but it's an interesting narrative nonetheless, just the way it starts. Okay, you have Abram living with his father, with his wife Sarai. Uh, Moses tells us that Sarai was barren. She had no children, but Abram's father, Terah, and Abram, and then Abram's nephew Lot, and Sarai, they all move. Stephen tells us in Acts chapter 7 that God called them. There went my camera a little bit. Makes you almost think we're having an earthquake or something, but we're not, that I know of. But anyway, Stephen tells us that God called Abram to leave and to go to Canaan, but for some reason they end up in Haran, which was quite a bit, how should we say it? It wasn't a direct route to Canaan at all. And so when Terah dies, Abram ends up making the journey down south to Canaan. God makes promises to him. He tells Abram, go. And then he says 5 times, I will, I will, I will. And he makes these promises to Abram. And so Abram makes his journey through really the length of the land. Now here's the rest of the chapter that I didn't have time to cover Sunday during the sermon, but it's interesting. It's very fascinating because we celebrate Abram for his righteousness. We celebrate Abram for his faith. He left his country. He left his family, it seems. He left, basically everything to go to where God called him to go, and he didn't know exactly where God was leading him. But God brought him there. And so he's finally in the land. He builds 2 altars to the Lord to worship God. And God has said, I'm going to make you, I'm going to give you this land to your offspring and whatnot. And you think, okay, here it is. It's great. It's wonderful. And then you get to verse 10. And verse 10 is just odd. And here's why. It says, now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. And now here's the reason it's odd, okay? And I don't know the exact reason why he left the land that God had brought him to go down to Egypt. Did God tell him to do this? It's not mentioned in Scripture that he did. Did Abram lose some faith in God, especially with a famine going on? Can you imagine what it would be like to go through a famine? And can you imagine to live in an area where maybe a famine has lasted for years? I mean, living in this area, we understand what a drought is. I don't know that we ever really known what a famine is. To be without food is just not there, and to really have to consider about going somewhere else to where there was food. And in ancient times, Egypt seemed to constantly be that place of refuge, that place where whenever your land was suffering, whenever there was not enough food, go down to Egypt, go down to where the Nile River produced food and seemed to produce in abundance. And so here is Abram. It says that he went down to Egypt to sojourn there. And my understanding here is that this indicates that it could have been for a short term, or it could have even been for a long term. But he did it because the famine was not just like, ooh, there's a famine. But no, it was a severe famine in the land. And notice verse 11, when he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. Fellas, take notes here. Okay, look at Abram. He knows how to treat his wife. He knows how to talk to her. I know that you are a woman, beautiful in appearance. Have you told your wife that she's beautiful today? But notice verse 12. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Now, it's interesting, right? Because Sarai at this point is 65 years of age. And not to say women can't be beautiful at 65 years of age, but especially in today's society, youth is celebrated. And most likely, a magazine is not going to put someone up that is 65 years or older up for the most beautiful woman in the world. But yet here is Abram, and he says, I know you're beautiful. And the Egyptians are going to see it as well. And when they see that, they're going to look at me as your husband. They're going to know that you're my wife, and then they're going to kill me, and they're going to take you. Now, a few things to consider here. Michael Whitworth, in his commentary here on Genesis, suggests a couple of things considering Sarai and her beauty. Of course, people were living longer during this day. So at 65, was that really more like a 35-year-old, maybe a 40-year-old, maybe, possibly? Did God just make her extra beautiful? Yeah, probably, in a way. And maybe there's a little bit of the both. So here's what Abram tells Sarah, his wife. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. Now, here's where we get to that lack of faith I think I was talking about with Abram. And that's something that I appreciate about the people that God puts in the Bible for us to learn about. Yes, Abraham is celebrated because of his faith and his righteousness, but we also get to see shortfalls as well. And I really kind of think that this was a lack of faith in God here. Okay. Number one, did Abram leave a land that God had brought him to and go down to Egypt without God leading him there? If so, I think that was probably a lack of faith. Or if God directed him to go to Egypt, is it a lack of faith on Abram's part for God to take care of him? But is it also a lack of faith if Abram was not directed by God to go to Egypt and he still doesn't have faith in God to protect him when he's there, even though God says, I will make you a nation, your offspring will inherit this land, and at this point he does not have offspring? Hey, wife, do me a favor. Say that you're my sister. Husbands, probably don't try that with your wife. Verse 14. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. Once again, here, I consider that God probably made her very, very beautiful in appearance. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. Now it's interesting here. She was taken into his house. I don't know exactly what all that infers or what all that means. That happened, but notice there doesn't seem to be any resistance from Abram. Verse 16, and for her sake he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. So in a way, it seems like that Abram's plan was, well, say that I'm your brother, and that way I can negotiate the diary, in a way. Your father's not here, so the brother takes on that responsibility of negotiating what is given for the bride, right? And it seems like he's given quite a bit, but you still got to go, wait a minute, this is your wife. But notice what God does. God doesn't turn a blind eye to this. Verse 17, but the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Okay, so the word plagues here, just like with Moses in Egypt with the 10 plagues, seems like similar things are going on. That could not make Pharaoh very happy. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Pharaoh knows. Uh-oh. Now you're expecting here to Pharaoh to deal very violently with Abram. You know, if you thought you were going to lose your life before, now you surely should. But once again, I think we probably see the providence of God. Even though Abram is showing a lack of faith, God is still showing protection for him. Verse 19, why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her. Go. Okay. Pharaoh doesn't say, I'm going to kill you, man. No, he says, wife, here, go. You know, I think in his mind, he's thinking, she goes, he goes, plagues go. All trouble goes away. Verse 20, and Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away and his wife and all that he had. Now, probably when we're first reading this, and I understand probably most of the people that are watching this video, this is not the first time that we've ever read this. But just looking at it, just reading the narrative, it's like, okay, why would God bless Abram in such a way? You know, it seems like he's showing such a lack of faith, but yet he's still blessed. Look at the animals that he was given, the male servants, the female servants, everything. It seems like that he is leaving Egypt better than when he arrived in Egypt. But here's something for us to consider. Blessings from sin often come back to curse you. Think about that. Blessings from sin often come back to hurt you. Okay? Let's go to the book of Proverbs. A couple of verses I want to share with you from chapter 10. Notice verse 2 with me. Treasures gained by wickedness do not profit, but righteousness delivers from death. Okay, notice verse 24. No, verse 22 with me. Sorry. The blessing of the Lord makes rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. So there's a contrast here, right? Okay, one getting treasures gained by wickedness, and one getting blessings that make you rich from the Lord. Okay, when you get treasures gained by wickedness, the prophet writer says, it is not to your profit. When you get blessings from the Lord, they make you rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. So the question is, what's the sorrow that was added to Abram when he left Egypt? And they're not necessarily immediate sorrows, okay, that happen, but I do want us to consider a couple of maybe sorrows. Notice all the flocks that are given to him. What's going to happen with him, with Abram, and with Lot? Okay, they're going to come back to the land, and they're going to have to what? Separate. Why? Because their herds couldn't get along. Their herdsmen couldn't get along. There was too much livestock for the land to support, so they had to separate. And of course, for Lot, that would have consequences, a few consequences at that. But even for Abram, there would be consequences as well. Now look at verse 16 again. It says that he left, or he gained male servants and female servants from Egypt. Now, who was one of the female servants that he gained from this? Probably Hagar, right? All right, and Hagar's the one that once again shows a lack of faith. Sarah shows a lack of faith as well, and allows Hagar to be with Abraham. And what happens? She conceives a son. His name is Ishmael. And of course, we knows what happens to them when Isaac comes along. But also, we have to consider that Ishmael is considered to be the father of the Muslims. And there's going to be conflict that happens there between the offspring of Ishmael and the offspring of Isaac. And so really there was a nation that was born that was not of God. It was of man. And so there was going to be conflict there. And so I think that probably when we see what Abram took away from Egypt, ended up cursing him in a couple of ways, at least. So here's the thought for us. Number one, when we look at people in the Bible, let us not be overwhelmed by their righteousness and their faith and think, I could never be like that. God allows us to see often that people in the Bible, they mess up too. Okay, they're just like us. They're just like every other man in many ways. And you think about with Abram, I mean, he's 75 years old at this point. Has shown great faith, but yet there's times that he doesn't. And so here's my thought for us. May we be like Abram, not in that we lack faith or lose faith, but that we have faith with God. And even if it dwindles at time, may it come back even stronger. And may we allow God to use us and believe that the promises that he makes to us, he will fulfill and that he will bless us. All right. Next time, I'm not sure where we're going to be. I'm going to have to start skipping some chapters before the kids go off to LTC here. And we'll probably do that with the narrative of Abraham here in just a bit. And so next week, I'm not quite sure what we'll be looking for after the sermon. But God willing, you'll join me again. I hope this has been a blessing to you. Remember, God loves you. I love you. Have a great rest of your day and be a blessing to somebody. God bless.